Friends, welcome to a new episode of Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today we welcome Cary Claiborne. Cary is the CEO of Adial Pharmaceuticals, where they are focused on the treatment and prevention of addictions and other unmet medical needs. Cary's 40-year career began in very large organizations like Home Depot and GE. And then 20 years ago, Cary had an insight that he wanted to be part of organizations that were having a meaningful impact on the world and on people's lives. Who Cary is to me is wisdom. When you spend time with Cary, and hopefully as you spend time with him in this conversation, his thoughtfulness and character embodied by wisdom really comes through. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Cary Claiborne. Cary Claiborne, welcome. I am extremely excited and grateful that you're joining the show today. I've been excited for this conversation.
Well, thanks a lot, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our discussion.
Yeah, me too. So you just heard a really brief introduction of who you are and who you are specifically to me. I'd love for you to start, Cary, with just letting us know what you're up to in the world right now.
Sure. So it's been quite a busy 2022 for me. I right at the end of 2021, I joined Adial's board, and in December of last year, I came on full time as Chief Operating Officer, and we went through our top line results of our phase 3 trial mid-year this year. And in August, the board asked me if I'd be interested in coming on board as the CEO. So since end of August, I've been the Chief Executive Officer of Adial. And it's been quite an interesting shift from board member to full-time CEO. But I'm really excited about the opportunity that Adial has with our primary focus on addiction treatments and our lead drug candidate in alcohol use disorder.
Yeah, lots of questions there, and I'll hold those on pause for a second. One of the things, Cary, that we like to do on this show is just give a more of a three-dimensional view of those that are our guests. I often say we live in a two-dimensional world, and with LinkedIn and social media, and so we'd love for you to do that for us with the 3 H's. And the 3 H's are a hero, a highlight, and a hardship. Okay. Give us an insight on you with your 3 H's.
All right. Well, that's a great way to think about things. I guess when I think about my hero, the first thought that comes to my mind actually is my mother, who was a single parent who raised me and my brothers. She was a elementary school teacher. And I love to say that she was so dedicated to her children, her biological children, but also her school children. And just watching her as I was growing up, she was a great example of leadership. Like, she had a very subtle way of building confidence. Not a cheerleader by any means, but just she had a way of convincing me that I could do anything I put my mind to in a very subtle way. And that stayed with me throughout my career. She was also just a great example of hard work, dedication, passion, compassion, thoughtfulness, and probably most of all, faith. And also the instilling in me the importance of prayer in your life. So, that's the hero that comes to mind when you ask that question.
Could I ask, you said a subtle way of instilling confidence? Like, give us a peek on that. What did that sound like? What did that look like?
It was just, I guess the best way to think about it is her confidence comes out when she would talk to me about things I could accomplish. For instance, if you know anyone raised by a school teacher, if you bring home anything less than A's, And so you get that little disappointing look. You bring a B home or a B plus, and she just say, "Well, I know you can get an A in that class." So it was more her confidence kind of becomes a mirror to me. She's confident that I can do it, so that gives me the confidence. As opposed to, when I say not a cheerleader, not that sort of, rah, rah, fire you up, motivate you, then go do it. It was more just, I'm not getting excited about this because I know you can do it. I know you can do anything, that you put your mind to. And that just builds an inner confidence. And I try to do the same thing with my kids, just learning from that example.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for that. I just find it amazing of those influences and how they find their way into our life, like even many decades later. I love that. Thanks for giving us that insight. And what about either hardship or highlight? You can choose which one you go first.
Yeah, I'll go highlight next. I would say on a personal level, highlight definitely is, getting married. So marrying my wife and then the birth of my children. Those are definitely personal highlights. I don't think anything can change you more than becoming a husband and a father.
Yeah.
Let's talk about life-changing events. Definitely a highlight there. I would say on a business side, one of the highlights was really successfully completing the IPO of Osiris Therapeutics, which was this little company that wanted to change the world with stem cell drugs, and successfully taking that company public, providing funding to support and grow that mission was definitely a career highlight.
And what about hardship?
Hardship, probably next phase of my career after Osiris was running a biofuel business. And the hardship I would say is during the financial crisis, learning that even if you've got a great business, a great product, a great concept, raising enough capital to really succeed that in a tough market environment is a lesson learned, and a disappointment in the fact that we weren't able to attract capital in that kind of market environment to really take that great idea forward. And that was over 10 years ago. So maybe alternative energy was a little more ahead of its time back then. We're hearing more about it now. But that's definitely a disappointment or a hardship I would reflect back on.
And I mean, we've had our ups and downs market wise since 08, 09, but I'm wondering, the season that we find ourselves in right now, where the financial markets are tightening, especially in life science, there's the projections of possibly a recession. How did that experience, how is that helping you today?
Great question. I think it helps me because I know that, like you said, especially in this environment, small micro cap, life science companies are facing some major challenges in terms of the market not recognizing the value that they bring. Over 200 of the companies are trading at values below their cash or at their cash, which means the market's not recognizing anything, for the assets that are being developed. And, the reality is all of these companies won't fail, right? Some will succeed and some will bring promising therapies to the market. But what management teams have to do is balance, controlling costs, with investing in those promising therapies. And it's a tough decision because if you slow down on the development side, ultimately you're delaying those promising therapies getting to the patients that we're trying to help. But what we learned in the financial crisis is you do have to make hard decisions, and cash is king, and manage your cash. But what we also learned is that will come to an end at some point. Things will turn around. And really the key is finding investors that are willing to invest, in companies that have promising therapies, but they have to have the perseverance and the resolve to stay with those companies through that period. And the investors that do, when we get to the other side, and the other side is really when things get better and when products do get approved, those investors will be rewarded. But the challenge is finding those investors that are willing to stay with you through that period.
Yeah, and I've been feeling this more and more. The deeper I'm in the space is now more than ever, and I'm sensing this from you. Alignment of all the players is so important. Alignment of expectations, alignment of strategy, alignment around vision. It feels like in shaky moments, alignment is maybe the most important thing. Would you say that's true?
I think that is. I think alignment of all those points you just made, and in small companies like mine and others, confidence in the management team that is charged with, running the business, because you're not just investing in the technology, and the therapeutic molecules under development, but just as much you're investing in, can this team succeed and get us through that? And I hear that a lot from people, the current investors and new investors coming in. They say, look, I'm betting that you're going to deliver. And they look at your track record. And so credibility is really important, that you're able to deliver on the things you've made promises that you can do.
Yeah, there's the expression, don't bet on the horse, bet on the jockey.
Right.
It feels
right.
like what you just described is the embodiment of that we're investing in as much you and your people that you surround yourself with as the thing you're creating.
It's absolutely true, because no matter what your plan is, it's never going to go according to plan. So you have to have the ability to navigate around those uncertainties. Like I said, I like to say, weather the storm, because the storm's going to come, and the best laid plans never work out exactly as you think. So how you handle those changes and roadblocks and speed bumps as they come up, that's really the key to being successful.
Yeah. Oh, it's really good, Cary. Thanks for pulling back the curtain on you, and it's super helpful. So the show is called Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having, and we usually, one of the on-ramps to get to those conversations is what we call a counterintuitive truth. And that comes in the form of a sentence stem. Most people believe or think blank, but the truth is something different. I'm wondering, when you hear that idea of a counterintuitive truth, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Great question. Well, one that really comes to mind is, so most people think that the real innovation, it comes from big businesses. But the truth is, from my perspective, small is beautiful. That the real innovation comes from the small companies that are more nimble, in a lot of cases, are thinking outside the box. And that's where the real innovation comes. And that's across multiple industries, not just life sciences, but across most industries, you see that.
What that word, you could have chosen a lot of different words, but you said small is beautiful. What is that? Why that word?
Great question. I think it's because beautiful, it's attractive. So if you think of it from an attractiveness standpoint, a lot of people may not be interested in small companies. It may not be for them. I worked in a lot of large companies, especially the first half of my career. And there's a lot of things you get in those large companies, more security. You're not worried about making the payroll, hopefully, things like that. So some people may not be attracted to small companies because there's higher degree of risk. But I call it beautiful, the attractive side of it is, you get to work, your work becomes more meaningful in a small company, because every single person, for instance, at Adial, we're just 16 people. We use a lot of external resources to help us, but every person in the company can make a meaningful impact on where we go. And if you're, at a large company where you're one of 200,000, you won't feel that same level of impact. And I think that's why I call it beautiful, just because it can be very attractive to the right person, but you need the right, I think, person, certain personal characteristics to be able to thrive and do well in a small company environment.
Yeah, and I'm wondering what, because you've navigated both worlds, both the extremely large, which I'll talk to you about in a little bit, but extremely large down to the very small. What is the mindset for whether it be you as CEO or your frontline, bench scientist? What's the key to that mindset as you're building a team and trying to fuel the fire of innovation?
Well, for companies like this, like in life sciences, like Adial, Cyrus, and some of the others I've worked for, it's really a patient-focused mindset. You have to realize that, that what we are trying to do is bring therapies to patients that are in need, and that every hour matters in some cases in what we're doing, because the longer we take to get things done, the longer it will take to get those therapies to the patients that are in need. So you have to have certain characteristics when you're looking at who are the right people to work in a company like this.
Yeah. Now I'll be devil's advocate for a minute, listening to that and thinking, well, I'll just name a giant life science. I'm at Novartis. I'm at Pfizer. I care about the patient. I think about the patient, and you've just said that, you've mentioned that for the small. What? And again, nothing against those companies, and totally true. I believe deeply that they are committed to the patient. I'm wondering what is the maybe somewhat imperceptible differences that makes one more of a fit with that patient focus for the small environment.
I think flexibility, the ability to do many different things, because if you're at a Pfizer or a Novartis and you have a job, you're probably very focused on that job and that role, and it probably doesn't change that much. But if you're in a small company, you can wear 5 different hats. You can learn more because you're wearing multiple hats. You have to be that person that can be flexible. Like one day they're working on a chemical assay, and the next day we need them to help us prepare for an investor presentation. And other companies I was at, like Osiris, someone when we interviewed them, that's what they love to do. They were assays. They love working in the lab, and they became an investor relations person by the time they left that company, because we needed their skill set in that area, and they had a desire to learn and do that. And you don't really get that opportunity as much in large companies, where 1 week you're doing something in market here, 1 week you're doing something in marketing, the next week you're doing something in R&D, the next day you're helping with clinical, just because those needs exist, and you can't be siloed in a small company. So there's from a growth and development standpoint, there's advantages to it. The fact that you can walk in and talk to the CEO, how many people can do that in very large companies?
Yeah.
Or the CFO, or the head of chief medical officer. So there's definitely benefits to it for the right person.
And this juxtaposition between the very large and the very small, you've clearly pointed to the advantages, especially around innovation. I'm wondering, because you've been at the very large, GE to be specific, what are the lessons that a small company can learn from the very large?
Great. I mean, a lot of the same lessons I learned at GE I've carried with me ever since, through other large companies to the very small companies. Because what made you successful in GE will make you successful anywhere with some of those same attributes. So there are things like, control your destiny or someone else will. That works just as well in a small company as a large company. Don't manage, but lead. Difference between just managing it versus leading people. Change before you have to. There's just a lot of values that were driven, through Jack Welch and his leadership, and he pushed down across the company that I've carried since, that fit just as well in a small company that's easy to communicate and people can clearly get. You don't need to go get an MBA to understand some of those things.
Yeah. One of the things I hear from very small companies, especially startups, is where I get some pushback is culture and values. They think, well, Jeff, we'll focus on that when we're such and such a size, or we just don't have the time or the capacity for that right now. What would, if there's a CEO of a small company that's listening to this conversation who may have that thought or maybe have said that, what's your response around when it specifically relates to culture and values?
I think every company should have, decide at the top what the culture and values should be. And you don't need to invest a lot in it. You don't have to hire consultants to come in and help you figure it out. I'll use a great example. When we were taking Osiris from sort of a research-focused company to a development company that was striving to get, drugs on the market as soon as possible, we looked at what are the 5 or 6 key characteristics we want every employee in this company to possess. And if they do, that is the culture. And it were simple things like strength, passion, courage, energy, decisiveness, willing flexibility. And then how you drove those into the culture was, those are the attributes when you were hiring people you looked for. We assume if a recruiter did their job and you have a slate of candidates that you're looking at, let's not focus on the education or the experience. Let's assume the recruiter did their job and they're all pretty comparable, but let's focus on these other things I just mentioned during the interview process. Strength, courage, energy, passion, things like that. And ask employees, give me an example of how you use strength. Give me an example of how you fail. And if someone said, well, I've never failed at anything, that may raise a flag. But if you focused on those attributes and then you hire people that met those, that's how you drive a culture, even in a company of 20 or 30 people.
Yeah. There's an expression that I've tried to live by for a long time, and that I've taught around values, is values aren't your values until they're tested. And whether at Adial or prior experience, where can you give us an example where you did the work, you defined the values, but it wasn't until they were tested that you said, those are actually our values?
I think as any time you, again, as I said, when you may have a plan, you may go perfectly on paper, and then when you go to execute it, you get, a disappointing result from a clinical trial. And that's when your values get tested. So, perseverance being one of the key ones. So, how you handle that? How you handle disappointment? How do the leaders handle it? Everybody's, disappointed over that. But you're really tested when you've got to figure out, so what do we do from here? How do we make adjustments? Or how do we keep the mission moving forward? I think in life sciences, a lot of every company eventually will find that, because not every trial, goes like gangbusters and hits on every endpoint that you're trying to get to. So you have to have a plan B and figure out where you go from there.
Yeah. In your journey, especially when you moved into smaller organizations, I'm assuming that they had some form of a culture or values when you arrived. How do you, when there is something existing, how do you as the CEO, how do you put your unique stamp on those cultures without undermining what they've previously done or saying that those are wrong or incorrect? How have you put, from your seat as the lead executive, how have you put your unique stamp on the culture of the companies you've led?
Yeah, I think it's important to when you come in as CEO, communicate your mission, your view of the company and what's important and what you see as the values of the company. And by having that discussion, with your team and with the employees in general, people will get an understanding of where I want to go, where I want to take the company. And sometimes some people may not be on board with that. And that can be, that can be fine too. But you have to, share that and communicate that, and then hear them out. Hear people out about, what they like about what's been going on in the company, what changes they think need to be made. Because a lot of times, some of the best ideas can come from pretty far down the organization sometimes, and people felt like they were never heard. So you give people an opportunity to say what's on their mind as well, and then really kind of roll it out. This is how we are. This is the company we're going to be going forward. Here's what our goals are. Here's what the plan is, and here's how we plan to execute on that plan. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think those that gravitate to that, hold on to it, the culture will change.
And I know from our past conversation, your personal values go with you everywhere that you go. You're a committed follower of Christ, and that what comes with that is a set of values and principles. How is that in a very secular, we could call even a post-Christian world that we live in? How has that shaped how you do come into a company and live out those values?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's almost another one your counterintuitive truths when you think about it. I would say most people think being a Christian or having Christian values in business is difficult, but I would say it's completely the opposite. That the values and lessons as a Christian that you learn from the Bible is very relevant to business. There are great examples of leadership, all throughout the Bible, starting with Abraham and Moses and Joseph, all the way up to David, Solomon, and the Apostle Paul. Those were all great leaders, but none of them were perfect. They all had flaws. They all made mistakes along the way, but through their perseverance and faith, they were successful. And it's interesting. I think a lot of the values that you could just look at Christ as an example. You demonstrate. I feel like I try my best to demonstrate those values, and people may not even realize that those are Christian values. If you look at Christ as a leader, what he possessed, or the attributes he had, there were things like wisdom, compassion, passion, decisiveness. He was a great communicator. He showed courage. He showed perseverance, and most of all, he showed faith. And if you think about it, you need all those to be successful in business. You need all those to be a successful leader in business.
Yeah.
And those are all Christian values. People may not realize it, but they are. And to me, it's easy. It's easy taking that from company to company and role to role. I just think they are very important,
Mm.
in terms of how you deal with your employees, how you deal with your, external constituents, your investors and so forth. It's a day-to-day thing for me.
Mm.
And I think it's very key to being successful.
Yeah, in our family, we talk a lot about being the hands and feet of Jesus wherever we go, and others may not recognize it. But my feeling as I'm listening to you, Cary, is that that's something that you try to live out in your professional life.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
Try very hard to do
Is
it.
there any you mentioned compassion, passion, wisdom, is and other characteristics? So are there any of those that you consistently lean on and find, yeah, just find as being have a powerful influence in what you do?
Absolutely, probably more than any, wisdom.
Mm.
The wisdom is the principal thing. That's a scripture. Wisdom is the principal thing, and all you're getting. Ask first, get wisdom, then get understanding. I think if you look at business, solving problems, wisdom. First, you get the wisdom, then you get the understanding, and you solve the problem. And I think wisdom comes with years of experience as well. So I hope I'm a lot wiser now than I was 40 years ago when I first got into this. But I think that is probably one I lean on the most, beside faith. Just keeping the faith is very important. As we're in business and trying to make a company successful, you got to keep the faith along the way.
Yeah. For you, what's the definition of that word, wisdom? I mean, it's got a lot of connotations, but for you, what's that word mean?
To me, it means figuring out what to do when you don't know what to do. So taking the time to use and think about everything you accumulated over the years in terms of other similar situations, and then knowing internally what the best solution is and how to get there.
And tell us that formula again. I know it, but but what's that formula? Wisdom first, and what's
wisdom first, then you get understanding, and then you solve the problem once you have that understanding. So a lot of times I think we try to solve problems before we fully have the understanding of what actually the problem is, and then trying to solve it. I think you have to follow that sequence.
Right. What does wisdom tell you about the future of work, of the business world that we find ourselves in? Because we're at a I won't say we're exactly at a crossroads, but we're at a season of time. We're at a really big crossroads with COVID in just our close proximity in our rearview mirror. We have potentially a recession. We have a national election, another one coming up in 2 years. What does wisdom tell you about the direction that business needs to go?
Great question. I think for me, first, wisdom tells me that I should look at what COVID, look at COVID and look how COVID has changed things, and really think, how the positive that could come from what we just went through with COVID. And what I mean by that is, what we learned is, one, the whole what we're doing now, remote, being able to do things remotely, I think has changed people's view on how the workforce can work. We now know that you can have a team all over the world if you needed to, and not be necessarily focused on, I need everybody that can be based where I'm based and in my home place. So technology, we've learned, wisdom is shown. For me, the wisdom is the technology advances we learned with COVID. We also learned that, drugs can get developed a lot faster. If we look at how fast things got developed with the vaccines, why just the COVID vaccine? But, now let's figure out how drugs can get developed faster across the board as a result of what we learned from going through the pandemic and through COVID. So it's just, a bunch of things like that that I think, will affect us going forward. And we need to, learn from those lessons that we went through with COVID and take the positive out of it and let that frame how business works in the future.
And when you took your role just last year as CEO at Adial, what were you looking at in terms of where we were at? Again, we were just at the coming out of, you could say we were just at post-COVID or at the very beginning of post-COVID. What were you thinking about in terms of 3 to 5 years about Adial, given the moment in which you entered that seat?
Well, what I was really thinking about were the number of people out there that are just suffering from addiction, and how we could bring another solution to that area, especially with alcohol use disorder, which affects so many people. Some estimates put it at 35 million people in the U.S. That are suffering from that. The numbers are much larger than the opiate crisis numbers, which gets a lot of attention, and rightfully so. People actually overdose, things like that. But a lot of people die as a result of alcohol. It's the leading cause of death for young adults 18 to 49. So, what I wanted to see in the next 3 to 5 years was success in bringing ADO4, our lead drug, to the market, and be laser focused on how we can do that, because it's definitely a need that needs to be met, and we think we have a unique solution there. And that's why I decided to get involved as CEO of the company. I felt like I was the best person to pick up that baton and keep it going, keep the race going to get us there.
How has your motivation over your career shifted in terms of role? Because I'm hearing really clearly this role you chose because of impact and something that's really critical for those that are suffering or will be suffering from that. How has your motivation for taking roles, how has that shifted over the last 40 years, 35, 40 years?
It definitely was a shift, probably about 20 years ago now. After, as you said, I worked for large companies, GE, Home Depot, MCI, 3 Fortune 20 companies, so very large companies. But as I got into my early 40s, I started to look back and say, okay, what mark have you really made? You helped a lot of big companies make a lot of money, and that's great. And you've had great experiences, but if you just look at, okay, what did I contribute to the world going forward? I couldn't really say something other than I helped a lot of companies make a lot of money and be successful. And then I got to Osiris. I got recruited to Osiris, which is a privately held company at the time, small team of people, new CEO. I went in as CFO. And they were dedicated to bringing the world's first adult stem cell product to the world. And their lead indication was a terrible disease called graft versus host disease, where literally these patients were already suffering. They had been through cancer, been through a bone marrow transplant. Now the transplant had turned against them and was destroying their own body. And, a lot of these patients were babies. And I was looking at what we were doing, it's like, we're literally saving babies. Even though we're word approved, we're getting compassionate use requests through FDA. When patients have exhausted all other possibilities, they can use an experimental treatment. And I was like, wow, that's meaningful. That makes a difference. That is, again, so much more important than, at the time I said, then how many cans of paint Home Depot sold last week? this matters. And from that point on, I was sold on life sciences because you can literally every day feel like you can make a difference, and if you can help people survive, deal with now it's addiction, which is destroying families. If you can bring something to the world, get it approved, it can help with that. That's something you can feel good about. You can look back, 20 years from now, if you help get a drug on the market, and say, yeah, I helped be a part of that. And to me, that was the difference. That was the pivot for me. And everything I've considered since, I've always looked at it from that standpoint. What's the company doing? I'm on a few other boards, and both those companies are also very involved in some very debilitating diseases that they're trying to bring solutions for. And you just can feel like you're making an impact, helping those companies be successful.
What's whether it be an employee, maybe one of your kids, somebody you have a chance to mentor, what is it that you say to them to help them see that way sooner? You said it was in your 40s that you had this aha moment. What's the counsel or direction you give to younger people? I mean, ultimately they have to make their own choices,
right?
But to help them see that way sooner.
It's an interesting question, because I think it's one, they have to like what they're doing. That's a big part. And I always liked even when I was working for those big companies, I loved what I was doing. I loved, what those companies were doing with learning. But I guess what I would talk to younger people about is, do you feel like what you're doing is making an impact? And if you don't, try to align what you like doing with where you can do it, where it really can make a long-lasting impact. And you may not be able to find that right away, but if you start building your career toward that goal, you'll get there sooner than I got there. I wasn't really thinking about it, in my 20s. I was thinking about having a successful career. I knew I wanted to be a chief financial officer early in my career. So I was really geared toward, building the experience level base to get there. But I wasn't really thinking about what kind of market. So I think just kind of planting the seed. A lot of times you can just be a planter of a seed, and that's all it takes.
I have this picture of your mom where she's just saying, I just have a sense, obviously I've never met her, but I know you could do better.
Thanks, sir.
I know you could do better. I know you could have a bigger impact. And yeah, I just have this big, obviously you can see I have a big smile on my face, just thinking about how she might approach one of those conversations.
Yeah, that you nailed it. A little 5'2". She's deceased now. A little 5'2", elementary school teacher, soft spoken, but kind of will give you that look like, okay, well, all A's and 1 B. I know you can get all A's. You have it.
I can only imagine she's pretty proud of you and for what you're doing in your life. If folks want to know more about you or Adial or anything that you're up to, what's the best way for them to do that, Cary?
They can reach out. They go to our website, Adial Pharma or adial.com, and click on our investor section. There's a lot of great information on the company and the history and what we're doing, and reach out to us that way. And
awesome. We'll put that.
I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll put all those relevant links on the show notes. Thanks so much, Cary. This has been a lot of fun. This is my last one of these for the day, so I'm gonna leave with a big smile on my face. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time and the conversation.